Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting the OECD to participate in this discussion. We've heard from two very good speakers today about digital trade. As we know, digital trade occupies one corner of a larger landscape, which is called the digital economy. There's been a lot of discussion about digital trade across all sectors, but I think many of you know digital trade and digital economy is not new. A number of organizations, including the OECD, has been looking into various aspects of both, probably almost over 2 decades. But what is new is that the volume of the transactions have exploded because of the growth of access to the internet. And because of this, there's been an explosion of transactions and therefore significant impact on our economies. And so, of course, there's a lot of attention on digital trade, and so that includes a lot of political attention as well. I'll just pick some random slides to discuss. So I think Bill and Joshua both mentioned that there's no agreed and recognized definition for digital trade. There's a general understanding of it, but 2 or 3 people can be talking about digital trade. But what I think of digital trade could be a little bit different from what Bill is thinking, and again, could be a little bit different from what Joshua is thinking. For instance, I could be thinking of digital trade in sort of the traditional e-commerce sense of whereby I go online to an internet company like eBay or Amazon, and I purchase a good, so it's a digitally enabled transaction, and then the good is delivered to me physically. And then Joshua could actually be thinking a little bit beyond that and include a movie that he purchases on from a company like Netflix. So this transaction is digitally enabled, but it's also digitally delivered. So that's a little bit different. And then you have other companies, a lot of platforms, a lot of matching platforms like Uber or Airbnb, various hotel sites, apartment sites. Then you also have something like Facebook. That provides a service. It provides a social networking service. But when something is digital, it becomes very complicated because you're not sure where the lines are, and you're not sure where the transaction takes place. So at the OECD, we're looking into this, and as a first step, we think it's important to think of it in these terms. Digital trade is underpinned by data flows. And then it has to be digitally enabled in some way. The delivery of it could be physical, but also could be digital. Then we're looking at what are we talking about? Are we talking about goods, or are we talking about services? Or is it unclear whether it's a good or service? So what we've decided is that perhaps trying to distinguish whether something is a good or a service is not the most important question. So we're looking at this issue in terms of data flows. So we're not really trying to make a decision, at least at this stage, of trying to identify what kind of transaction is involved here. So we at the OECD have started work on trying to unpack digital trade, and that means basically trying to identify what all of the various issues are. We have some very interesting figures and graphs, but our work is very much in progress, and so unfortunately I'm not able to share any of that work with the public yet. So for my presentation today, I decided to include some amusing pictures, so I hope that'll do for you. So in terms of our work, we're finding as we're unpacking digital trade, we're finding that we're asking more questions than we have answers. So we're developing what we call a typology for digital trade. We're asking, how is this transaction possible? Is it digitally enabled? Is it physically enabled? Is it physically delivered? Is it digitally delivered? We're asking who the actors are. Are the actors business? Are the actors consumers? Are the actors government? Is it a business-to-business transaction? Is it a business-consumer transaction? Is it a consumer-to-consumer transaction? So digitally enabled transactions are very complicated, and we're finding it very difficult to try and separate the personal data from non-personal data, which is a challenge I think a lot of governments, a lot of businesses have. And so without more information from business, it's difficult for us to try and figure out what the statistics are in terms of the trade. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of businesses like Uber and the matching platforms where it seems to us that businesses don't necessarily separate the commercial elements from the personal data elements. But at the OECD, we feel that it's important to try and develop an agreed, concise framework so that we can analyze digital trade by stepping back to the first principles and trying to determine the first principles based on what the measurement needs are. That way, we will be able to develop policy recommendations that we can offer governments for developing policies that benefit the digitalization of our economy rather than hinder our economy. So I noted earlier data flows underpins all digital trade. And for businesses, particularly the SMEs, which Joshua noted, digital trade offers great opportunities, in particular to SMEs, because they have access to foreign markets that they've never had before. But digital trade is an exciting opportunity for all businesses, regardless of type. And all modern business models need data flow to operate. But unfortunately, there is a growing evidence indicating that there are increasing restrictions on data flows. Bill went through a list of some of the restrictions, like data localization, where there is a requirement for companies to keep certain data in certain geographic locations, and this usually applies to sector-specific areas. Then there's restrictions on general data flows, and this generally involves personal data. These kinds of restrictions are usually applied horizontally across all sectors. Regardless of the restrictions, because of the global nature of the internet, and there is an escalating cost to have a patchwork approach of different approach for data regulations, we all need to come together to try to work toward a global common understanding of how to deal with data. As I noted at the start, we have work ongoing trying to clearly define what we mean by digital trade. And I don't think we're going to come up with a perfect definition, and I don't think we need to, but we all need to come to agreement that we mean the same thing when we say digital trade. So this work is still very premature, but there are useful experiences that we can draw from. For instance, the OECD principles for internet policymaking would be a good place to turn to get some thoughts. There's also the WTO SPS TBT issues that have come up, and those are also important areas that we could turn to. Regardless, when the discussion moves forward, it's very important that all stakeholders implicated participate in the discussion. It should be a multi-stakeholder discussion whereby we turn to the technological knowledge of businesses, we involve civil society groups, and we involve governments and government entities across all sectors, because as we know, there are various implications on digital trade that unless you start unpacking this issue, you don't realize how broad and how broad an implication it has on everything, privacy, security, and so on. So coming together to reach a common understanding, we believe will help governments tackle this issue by putting in place policies that address legitimate privacy concerns without hindering the benefits that all of us can reap from on digital trade and the digital economy. So that's it. Thank you.